can I build true, like really marquee wealth by using SIPs?
Yeah, you can. Disclaimer here. Should a young person give up their career and only do investing? I'm not saying that. You do an SIP into a large cap or mid cap or any one of these. Most people earn 12, 13, 14% over a 10-year period. In this country, महंगाई, जिसको हम inflation कहते हैं, it grows at 4-5%. So you're making progress.
What is more important here, the habit of putting the money away or understanding where to put the money away?
The habit.
Build the habit first.
Build the habit first. I'm saying if you're putting 1,000 rupees away a month, I'm very proud of you. We say cycling, driving is a life skill, cooking is a life skill. Basic money understanding is also life skill.
Would you say equity is the best way to go for a young person?
I think all of us have no choice but to have a reasonable quantum of equity in the portfolio. I'm not saying only equity.
Russia, Ukraine ho raha hai ki, or US and Iran are at loggerheads. The market will like cut a little bit that morning in reaction. Should I be sitting at my terminal and topping up my mutual funds, or just do the SIP and leave it? Radhika, thank you so much for joining me. The only woman CEO in the mutual fund industry.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to talk about. And this is, money management for dummies.
Yeah.
And
Aam Janta.
So I have a bunch of questions on investments for you. Radhika, as a salaried person, can I build wealth if I'm salaried and I'm using SIPs? Is that hand on heart actually a true thing, or is it just marketing? Can I build true, like really marquee wealth by using SIPs?
Yeah, you can. Disclaimer here. Should a young person give up their career and only do investing? I'm not saying that. But can you take the money that you've earned, earn meaningful returns on it, live a better life, fulfill all your goals, retire really nicely, fund your retirement expenses, some luxuries? Absolutely you can. And I think that's a very wealthy life.
Because there's this idea that obviously there are people who come from money, right? Multi-generational wealth. And then there are those of us who have salaries and we have expenses and we have vacations and we have people to look after and, and then there's something left at the end of the month and you can put that in an SIP, but there's a sinking feeling that you will never catch up.
Yeah.
Are you saying that we can catch up?
I don't know what the definition of catch up is, but I can tell you that you do an SIP into a large cap or mid cap or any one of these your lovely diversified equity funds. Most people earn 12, 13, 14% over a 10-year period. In this country, महंगाई, जिसको हम inflation कहते हैं, it grows at 4-5%. So you're making progress towards your goals. You can certainly through an SIP give your child a better education that maybe you have had. Fulfill the dream of buying a house. Fulfill the dream of having a very nice retirement. I think these are good things. Now, are you going to tell me, can an SIP take you from lower class to rich? I don't know if it's meant to do that. An SIP can't defy the laws of financial gravity. But it can give you a very dignified life without too much drama.
As the Indian middle class, so much of our drama and pain is real estate related because either you're paying your rent, which is a large chunk of your take home, or there's this whole idea that you haven't fully grown up and arrived until you buy a house. कहीं पे गांव में जाके खरीद लो लेकिन कुछ तो खरीदो, अपनी होनी चाहिए कुछ छत. But it's damn expensive.
It is, and I think it's a call. Look, I came from Delhi, where in the 90s, you hadn't made it till you had property.
Yes.
And if you had property, like, you would go and say, if there was a rich uncle, he would say, देखो मेरा वहाँ घर है और वहाँ छोटा सा plot है और वहाँ office मेरा. This is. Now, I think that's changed and people have had so many misadventures with real estate. It's crazy, right? I think a primary home is a very emotional decision, okay? And there is no right answer. If you ever do the economics, the Excel of buying a home, it makes no sense.
Yeah,
it's stupid math,
yes,
okay?
Yes.
Because,
And with a home loan, it's just like
with a home loan, it's all nuts.
It's all, yeah.
Okay, rental yields in India are 2, 3, 4%. EMIs are like 8, 9, 10%.
Maintenance,
illiquidity, blah, 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 blah. I can go on and on. That said, I'm a financial services professional who has a home. So it is an emotional decision. I think you can't put a price. And the problem with home ownership, primary home ownership, is if you try to rationalize it on a spreadsheet, it never works. I only think that it's an emotional call whether you want to do it. When you want to do it, I think should be thought through and how much you want to do. I actually think I'm not a big fan of debt in general, but I think home loans are one of the better kind of debt in India.
Okay.
Because interest rates are reasonable, finally you are building an asset, okay? And as long as you can handle the interest and it's not a mental burden. And whether it is a mental burden, for only you can take.
So let's assume now you've done it, you've built this, you call it an asset. But would you also call it an investment?
I don't think of my primary home as an investment.
It's not.
I don't. Because then when I look at an investment, I look at it as a spreadsheet. And then, you have to fulfill. And that's why, by the way, I don't buy secondary real estate because that is an investment. Like
so you're saying that you've bought the house that you live in with your
family. But if
family.
you ask me to buy a second one, I'm not buying.
You're not buying it. Because you think that real estate as an investment
Yeah.
doesn't hold a candle to
For the general part, and I know I will get killed for saying this, I think people underestimate the problems of real estate and the illiquidity. And I have seen so much of this. Log ghar kharidte hain. When they want to sell it, they can't sell it. Like, we have a family home somewhere, there was someone who passed away, trying to sell it. Acha, abhi wahan flood ho gayi hai. Abhi market down. So you don't have the money when you need it. If you want to partially sell it, you can't partially sell it. You rent it. You have another home somewhere, my husband's thing, but the person is not vacating it. You have transaction costs. You have maintenance costs. So I don't think that people see and factor this all in. And in India, we've only seen real estate going up and up and up because it doesn't have a daily price. If there was an NAV that came out of your home every day, you would not feel so comfortable about it.
This really interesting thing is happening in Bangalore, right? And the idea of ek baar ghar kharida to apni rehti hai, asset is value, all of that jazz. In Bangalore, earlier people would have these row houses, these bungalows, these standalone. So Indira Nagar would have these row houses. What has happened now in Bangalore is people want to live in gated communities.
Yeah.
Because they want all of this maintenance to be handled by somebody else. So these really beautiful row houses, which should get a great price, nobody wants to buy.
I would have never thought that. I don't know.
Yeah, and so you can no longer take for granted that there will always be value because patterns are changing. What people expect from their lifestyles are changing. Now, aajkal Mumbai, maybe people say, what is the amenities that you're building?
Yeah, everybody
don't have amenities. Nobody wants to buy. Because main naya kharid lungi usi mein se. So there are
older buildings don't have value.
Don't have value, yeah.
So you do.
So a lot of what we thought we knew about real estate is changing very drastically. So people are still buying.
Equity market, by the way.
Yeah, but they're not buying your stuff.
Yeah. The localities change. For instance, if you look at Mumbai as a micro market, and again, I'm not an expert, Nariman Point used to be the whole and center of town. That's gradually shifted to Worli and BKC and Prabhadevi. And you don't know how that's going to shift in 10 years, or because we've got Atal Setu or whatever is going on, nothing's going to shift to Navi Mumbai. So you actually don't know the parameters. And then you've got this illiquid asset you're sitting on that just may not sell. So why do that?
See, one of the things that, which is not fun. Well, every time I look at these real estate, ads and I still read a physical paper, and I always think, beta 10 saal climate change mein when the sea water comes up, your sea Rumaida, how much of this sea facing will be sea?
Well, it might not be sea facing because another building might come up also.
So you believe that you buy your house that you want to live in, if you want to live in, because it's an expense, it's an asset, it's
a purpose.
And outside of that, your asset classes are equity, debt.
My asset classes are equity, debt, gold, foreign equities. That's it.
Physical gold?
I don't like physical gold again. I know people can liquidate jewelry, but when I want to buy things for investment purposes, I prefer them in financial form. So I like gold ETFs, gold funds. I don't have to worry about the security of bars of gold in my locker and what's going to happen and the custody charges and all that lovely stuff. I just buy a gold fund. It's cheap, it's easy, it's accessible. I get the same thing.
So this gold fund is one among the 10 funds you were talking about. So that gets counted as well. Okay.
So it can either be in the format of a gold fund or it can be in the format of, the mutual fund industry has what I call these thali funds. And they have multiple things, multiple kinds of foods in one fund. So you have these hybrid funds which have equity and debt. So they're like khichdi, dal and chawal. Or you have these multi-asset funds that have equity and debt and commodities and it's all efficient.
So that's a good idea. That's a good idea for you. You did also at one point talk about inflation. You said in India, this is the inflation we're looking at. The one interesting thing, and we both have kids at the same age, education inflation.
Wild.
My God.
Oh, God.
So we're talking about school fees. I'm not even getting to like...
College.
I know you went to Wharton. We're not even going to start measuring what that's going to look like in 20 years. But school fees is doubling every 5 years.
Oh, it's doubling every 5 years in India. Wow. I had made this statement.
Willy-nilly, there's no, because also it's not regulated. So there's nobody saying that aap 10% badha sakte ho saal bhi.
And the problem is not only our school fees doubling. And by the way, I made this statement that went a little wild about a month ago because I had a foreign education about how I'm saving, how when our kids, if they want a foreign education, will need 10 crores. Yeah, so I did that. But even in India, if you look at it, it's not only that school fees are doubling, your aspirations are also increasing for your children. The school you went to is not the school you want your kids to go to. And see, you say AI, you say X, you say Y. We are a very education-centric society. India mein hum roti ek kam kha lenge, but we will educate our kids for the best.
Yeah.
It is like everybody you talk to, who's a middle-class person, like whether it's my father or colleagues will say, I could have become something more if my parents had a little more money or my education to compromise. Everybody you talk to. I did a CA because my parents didn't have money for an MBA. And education is not going away from the Indian DNA because it is the middle class route to success. And education inflation, real inflation plus aspirational inflation is real. Which is why I think everyone should do SIPs for their kids.
So are you doing, in your portfolio, is there a separate portfolio for your child's education or is it just one?
No. I'm a big believer in separate things for separate goals. So I've been talking about this, but he has, since he was very young, I think 4 months old, he's got his own PAN card, bank account, folio, everything. And we do SIPs for him separately. And the reason we do it separately, you can do it yourself. But if it's for a kid, you don't touch it. Like you never stop that SIP. Your time horizon suddenly becomes 15 years. Psychologically.
Yeah.
And that is for him. And then, your goals are separate. Like my retirement is here. His education is here. And it just helps you think a little bit better.
That's interesting. Because I remember asking someone when my kid was born, having this discussion, and that person said, you only have the one child. So everything that's yours is his anyway.
Yeah.
Why are you doing it?
I can see that logic. I just feel like a big education goal is then separated and I can see my retirement goal separately. And my time horizon for him is a little longer than it is for me in terms of investment thinking. Risk appetite is longer.
There's, when we talk about investments, right, and there's a lot of like Instagram reel-based investment advice. I like that. First of all, okay, what is your response to Instagram financial services influencers, finfluencers?
If we are to talk as an industry to a younger generation of consumers, we got to be present on social media. So I love social media. And I think the only thing is money is hard earned. And if you're out there with access to a phone and followers, use it to convey the right message, not that you're going to double your money in 3 years. Please. And if you're out there listening to this, please pay attention to who you're taking advice from. You don't take heart surgery advice on Instagram. Right?
Yes, they do.
If they do, then there's no hope.
I've had a bunch of doctors on this show who are heart surgeons and gynecologists and whatever, and they're complaining, saying you've got these random influencers coming in saying that, stop eating all of this, or start eating only this, or start like living in this man. There are people who eat only fruits, and there are people who eat only meat, and there are people who eat... And people are taking that advice, yeah.
They're taking advice from people who are not qualified to give the advice. Because those people are in the business of clickbait, those people are writing advice that is sensational, not moderate.
Yeah.
So it's either like Sensex is going to be at 3 lakhs in 1 year, or there's no point in doing an SIP ever because SIPs are a scam. It's either like what we say in UP, ya to rail mein hota hai ya jail mein hota hai. There's no, sensible, there's no moderate advice. And you don't know what incentives those people have to give you your advice, because this world is complicated and driven by economics. Please don't take advice on incentives.
I would say, the most important thing to keep in mind when you're taking advice from someone for your financial services is, what is that person's accountability?
Yeah.
If this advice turns out to be dud,
Yeah.
can you pull up that person?
Also, people have to realize financial advice is not generic. Like, it is not that you meet... Now, you and I are probably the same age. We both have kids. We're working women. But I don't think there is common financial advice for both of us. We have different circumstances, realities, personalities. Yeah. So it drives me nuts that people say, 75 saal ka hai, there are 2 guys who are 75, recommend them both FD 100 minus age 25 equals FD. I've had 75-year-olds who are super conservative because they're dependent on their kids for income. And I have my father who's 75-year-old who is a small cap investor because he has no liabilities. And both are okay. So it's also, financial advice is highly personal. It's like medical advice is suited for your body. So I understand the doctor's pain.
What is the most common mistake you have encountered people make when they're investing, like the average salaried person?
Well, one, I think they don't study enough, right? They just jump into it. So either they're very lazy and don't want to do anything, or they're like, let me start investing now. There's no gradual journey that people take of saying, let me study this, let me get educated, let me maybe start small, track this, grow big. Doing it in a planned way, I think is one of the things that people miss out on. The second one, since we talked about social media, is too much of this socialization phenomena of investing, which is this, I'll go out walking my dog and then one uncle will give me advice and I'll get jealous of his portfolio and then I'll do something. So there's a little bit of that, and it's all related. This has to be planned. Like, write down your goals from investing. Write down what's going to stress you out. If your funds or your portfolio falls 20%, are you going to feel bad? Are you going to have a calamity? Are you not going to be able to sleep at night? Or are you going to be okay? Write these things down. Write your goals and objective. What kind of funds are you going to invest with? When are you going to take out money? Just write and plan stuff down. And I'm a big planner type.
For someone who's young and starting off, and let's assume they're putting aside, one of my producers say, what if we put aside 10,000 rupees every month? I'm going to say 20 because that's what you should be putting aside.
Yeah.
You're putting aside 20,000 rupees every month. My first question is, what is more important here? The habit of putting the money away or understanding where to put the money away?
The habit.
The habit first. Build the habit first.
Build the habit first. I'm saying if you're putting 1,000 rupees away a month, I'm very proud of you. If you're a first-time investor, then increase it to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So the habit comes first.
First start. Should that habit be built with an SIP or a recurring deposit?
So both of them are similar in the sense they're both habit formation instruments. Now, a recurring deposit means the money is going into non-wealth creating instruments. And if you are a fully tax-paying person, then you're also paying a lot of tax on them. For most people, an SIP can park it into wealth-creating instruments, so it is better, even though my job is to say SIPs, I know that. But both build the habit. You're asking me what builds the habit better, or both build the habit?
So start off, and would you say equity is the best way to go for a young person?
I think all of us have no choice but to have a reasonable quantum of equity in the portfolio. I'm not saying only equity, but are you telling me today, can you build a portfolio with no equity? The answer is a big no, because reality is inflation in this country is 4-5%. If you put money in a bank or recurring deposit on an after-tax basis, you're making 4-5%, which means your money is growing at 0.
Yeah.
So you have no choice. Equity is, there are 4 core asset classes. real estate, equity, gold, and fixed income instruments. Equity is the only one which can structurally go up. Real estate, it's a physical good. Beyond a point in time, the government also has incentives to keep real estate prices in check. Gold is a commodity. Fixed income is going to be fixed income. You believe India's economy is going to do something, equity has no choice but to grow. At least for the next 15, 20 years of India that we live.
Because, we see a lot, and I'm guilty of this as well. When we're writing financial stories about investments, we'll say, if you invested 1,000 rupees every month for the last 20 years, you would now have 1 crore and something like that. But that's great on paper in an Excel sheet, but in life, you take the money out for a vacation, you take the money out for an unforeseen expense, something happens, somebody gets sick, you buy a house, you buy a car. How do you navigate those situations and stay invested?
And that's what I meant by planning, right? You actually have to, you talk about it here, you actually have to bucket money, right? I give a simple framework that you put 3 buckets of money. And that's why goals are so important, we talked about, right? You have money that is money that you need in a year or could need, and everybody has that pool. Most people can't put 100% of their money into equity because they have contingency expenses and life happens, right? That contingency, and by the way, I made the mistake at some point of not having a contingency fund when I started earning. It was the stupidest mistake of my life because then I had to redeem money from equity at a bad time. So everybody has short term. Then everybody has, and that goes into safe stuff. Then everybody has 3-year expenses. Like, I'm going to redo my interiors in 3 years. Or I'm going to And then everybody has that 5+ year kind of stuff. And you bucket your money and you allocate it to things depending on that bucket.
So basically, we put money away in buckets.
Yeah.
Let's assume you have 20,000 rupees to put away every month. And you say, I'm going to put this, I need to have 5 lakh rupees to pull out in case of emergencies, for unforeseen expenses, a vacation that simply cannot be turned down, whatever the case may be. And then you have that money that's going in for education, whatever for your child. And then you have the longer term stuff. So you know what this money is for.
Yeah.
And you're not touching it unless those things actually come up.
That's why bucketing thing just makes it, and build buffers into it. So keep 12 months of expenses.
Is the contingency fund or my emergency money better served in a debt fund, a debt mutual fund, or a fixed deposit?
It depends on your tax profile. And it depends on if you're a senior citizen, and I'm trying to give you an honest answer. Contingency money, the only thing is wherever you put it. If you're putting it in the bank and the FDs have all kinds of breakage, etc., then you have a problem. So the key with contingency money is it has to be safe. It has to be accessible. After that, you optimize. And with contingency money, to be honest, that's the one place you're not focused on being greedy. You're focused on access. Returns are going to... You don't put contingency money under your mattress, okay? But quite frankly, it doesn't matter. You don't optimize contingency money. You optimize long-term money.
Yeah, so if you put it in a fixed deposit where breaking it will involve a penalty, then it's working against being contingency.
Yeah. Contingency is for contingency.
For contingency. In fact, I read this article, tell me if I'm wrong, where the banking system now feels that because there's such a large SIP culture and regular people are now putting their money in SIPs instead of keeping it in fixed deposits, the banking system feels that it's at a disadvantage. कि basically, ये सारे पैसे अपने fixed deposits में रखते थे, अभी fixed deposit छोड़ के लोग mutual fund में डाल रहे हैं. Is that true?
Now, if you look at this data, mutual fund AUM as a percentage of bank deposit AUM, it's gone from, I think, 10% in the last 10 years to 30%.
Nice.
Plus. That, I think, is because India is structurally changing and people are getting more aspirational. They don't want to just earn inflation kind of returns with their money.
Also, पिछले 20 साल से we've been saying सही है.
We've been saying सही है. Digitization आ गया है. Aspiration level बढ़ गया है. बहुत सारी चीजें हुई हैं. And here we are. And we've not only been saying सही है. I would humbly say my industry is थोड़ा proving सही है also. ये सब हो गया. So money is not lost from the banking system. It's not going to FDs.
So actually, I had this question, which is for anyone who's already investing in mutual funds.
Yeah.
You said get advice, right? Get a good advisor who'll tell you where to put their money or even if, if you use your net banking, this thing to sort of move money into mutual funds, there is a certain amount of commission that you're losing out on.
Yeah.
And then there is the direct route,
which
now I understand a lot of fintech apps allow you.
Yes.
Where you're choosing and you're going into the direct route. And again, on the Excel sheet, that 1% that you're saving over the course of, say, 20 years really adds up to a fair amount, right? Should I go the direct route to save that 1%?
Depends on who you are. I think in investing, people are often penny wise and pound foolish, or paisa wise, rupee foolish, whatever you want to call it. See, there are people who need help and there are people who don't need help. And wisdom is in realizing which one you are. I do think managing money requires time, effort, and customization. Like, I'll tell you, with my family, we had a case where at some point someone needed money help and they said, oh, you have a mutual fund CEO in the family, why don't you just have her manage it? And I was like, no. I'm going to plant you, I'm going to give you an advisor because I know her needs. I know her life circumstances change. I can't monitor it every quarter.
Yeah.
And I know she doesn't have the ability. I know a trust has to be built for her children. Various kind of circumstances are there. A mutual fund distributor doesn't just select, or an advisor doesn't just select schemes. They have to, if they're doing a good job, they're supposed to craft a portfolio according to your needs. As your life circumstances change, structure the money so that maybe if you need regular income, get that going. Maybe if there's a planning that needs to be done for your kids' education, do that. Maybe if you have a specially abled child, get a trust fund set up. Maybe if you're going through a divorce case, run that. So if you can find someone who's adding that value and you need that value is more than 1%. If you feel you can do it yourself, by all means. I always say, if you can cook biryani yourself, do it. Otherwise, there's Zomato. Or we say cycling, driving is a life skill. Cooking is a life skill. Basic money understanding is also life skill.
That's true. I want to talk a little bit about the market, the equity market, right? So when you look at where we are in terms of valuation right now, do you see this as overheated, or do you see that there's more room? Because given what's happening with the rest of the world, India's sort of in its little bubble. And so
I think India has held up well. For 2024 and 25 have been exceptionally turbulent years globally. We have had twin challenges after a long time of so much global turbulence, geopolitically, economically, and of course all this tariff stuff. And then we've had the domestic problem of earnings slowing down. In that context, if you ask me where we are, valuations today are not cheap. They're not crazy. There's, of course, overheating in some segments. But for the broad part, our hope is that valuations are okay. But earnings growth will start coming in India.
Is there any evidence to show us that earnings growth is going to come in now?
There are two things you have to have optimism about. One is that decision making, which paused a little bit for the election, has started happening.
Okay.
And that should lead to earnings growth. The second is you had a consumption slowdown. And then after that, in this budget, there was tax relief given to middle. A bunch of things were done here. That should start kicking into the numbers. These are that's what I'm hoping to see in the second half.
Right, because you said we had a consumption slowdown, but we don't know for sure that it's behind us.
We don't know. We're hoping that it start to see an uptick.
Some of the things that companies like Dabur and HUL were telling us that log shampoo kam khareed rahe hain. That's not a good sign.
And I also think the color of consumption may change in India. Remember, India is, you may see people buying less shampoos, but you may see people spending more time in hotels. So India has also had a K-shaped recovery. Remember, you have India is one society, many societies within one single society. You have, part of the population, 10% of the country that is probably $12,000-$13,000 per capita income. Another, 10-20% is probably $4,000-$5,000. And then you have this bottom K. You also have shifts that are happening. So from a retail store, you have a lot of shifts happening to quick commerce. A lot of the reporting that happens, by the way, on consumption is traditional consumption.
Okay.
How much reporting happens on new age consumption?
But new age consumption data is so much more easily available, I would assume.
Reporting doesn't always capture it. Like the reporting that happens on quick commerce, how much of it comes in? What is your definition of consumption?
No, but I'm assuming if a Dabur is telling us and people are not buying, they're looking at it holistically for their entire portfolio. Well, whether you bought it from quick commerce or you bought it from a kirana store.
I'm not talking about Dabur. I'm just saying that when consumption is reported, it typically refers to traditional consumption, not new age sources of consumption.
If you were to keep a hedge against, one is, do you recommend that the average Indian investor has a global hedge to the Indian market? Because let's assume we are equity investors, our entire exposure is to the Indian stock market.
I always said people should have a hedge.
Is that US or China, or what should be the hedge?
I think the color of that hedge also has to be thought through. But one caveat on that hedge. The average Indian investor does not need to have a hedge, because the average Indian investor, I don't think, understands global investing. I think you should venture outside Indian equities when you understand Indian equities. Because I've seen, and we run large global funds, right? You know, when something goes wrong in India, people can handle it. When something goes wrong in China, they're like, "Ye Chinese market scam hai." That's the stuff. You don't understand that economy as well. You don't understand that market as well. So I think it should be your secondary. It's like stage 2 of investing. Typically, people's portfolios, when they did global portfolios, were only US centric.
Yes. NASDAQ most.
NASDAQ, which, I mean, it could be S&P, it could be NASDAQ, it could be an active fund, doesn't matter. I think, and the answer is not clear, one thing that we're learning over the last couple of years is perhaps the world order may be changing to be less US centric. And so could that mean a portfolio that has some US, but also some China and some ASEAN?
I think the whole upset between, say, NVIDIA and the Chinese companies now suddenly coming and saying, hey, we can do this, that costs less, it's like more efficient in every possible way.
China has also changed as an economy. It's not the low-cost manufacturer to the rest of the world.
Yes, it's innovating, it's
a leader.
It's leapfrogging.
It's leapfrogging. The economy is changing. It's becoming a lot more domestic rather than export-led, less leverage. So I think you'll have to watch that portfolio. That, again, is where I think advice could be very valuable.
Given Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and the fact that we cannot predict what he's going to do in the next 48 hours, are there sectors within our market you feel are more secure? Or as long-term investors, should we actually not care?
So one, as long-term investors, you shouldn't check your portfolio every 48 hours, okay? And as long-term investors, honestly, if you did diversified equity, you probably would be okay, because your fund manager would be nimble enough to catch the sectors. And India, structurally, the good thing about India is we're not a single sector economy. We are very much a multi-sector economy. We're not a oil economy or a tourism economy, I think.
And we consume most of our own product.
And we are a domestic economy.
Yes.
So, and I think we've held up very well. And if you look at the last 6 years of this decade especially, the greatest driver of market returns has been earnings growth. So where you have earnings growth, and as long as you see corporate profit growth, all these ups and downs happen. And they could affect some industries, but it works. I think there are emerging sectors, since you asked the question on sectors, that we see perhaps playing a larger role as we look at India of the future. And so, for instance, you look at the framework of hotels. The amount of hotels India has per capita versus the amount China has per capita versus the amount US has per capita, I think India has less than 500,000 organized hotels. That sector has to expand. There's no choice.
Because we have, interestingly enough, rooms, but beyond a certain category, your tourists will not use those rooms.
They won't. I mean, you go to Surat. I go to Surat a lot. Like 2 5-star hotels. Kind of 2 hotels. Kanpur doesn't have a 5-star hotel yet. It's not going to work, right? Ayodhya is still building hotels. And UP State had 32 crore tourists in the last year. This is not going to add up. So, and hotels are being built at Basel. The same thing is true, by the way, of hospitals. You just don't have enough beds. Beds in lakhs for a population of 140 crores. Math doesn't add up. The third one we think is very interesting is our own sector, which is capital markets, right? You talked about people not doing as many FDs, but you look at household savings and equities, it's 5-6%.
Yeah.
So your brokerage companies, your exchanges, your depositories, your asset management companies,
Your fintech guys.
your fintech, this is your wealth management companies, this is all structured. So hospitals, hotels, capital markets. As one of my fund managers says, when you're happy, you go to a hotel. When you're sad, you go to a hospital, and both are funded by capital markets.
We did briefly talk about US versus China exposure for mutual fund investors. Are there enough mutual funds in our market to give us this exposure if we choose it?
Now I think the
China exposure kaise?
China exposure, I mean, we run Edelweiss Radar China Fund, which must be the largest in the market. So we provide broad-based exposure to China and Taiwan. There are others. In fact, so there are multiple Greater China funds. The people who run China tech funds also. So there are options. Actually, for most markets and most opportunities, the mutual fund industry is now providing exposure.
Yeah.
Options की कमी नहीं है.
So if you look at right now, obviously your mainstay, you keep calling it dal chawal, right? Which is your equity diversified or your flexi, your small cap, mid cap. What are those interesting sort of accessories? China. The hedges you put.
China is an interesting idea today. There's been an onslaught of interesting passively managed funds. And within that, there's a category, and only now since you're talking accessories, of smart beta funds. So like a typical passive fund is like Nifty Index Fund or Sensex Index Fund.
Yes.
But there are these funds that pick up certain ways of investing, certain rules, and do it in a rule-driven way. They're smart beta funds. So, for instance, momentum funds have become very, very popular, or funds that buy only quality companies, or funds that buy only value companies. So, they are rule-driven. There's no fund manager, actually. But they are doing things. They're picking a narrow way of investing in the market and giving you a certain kind of exposure. So, that is there. There are always interesting thematic opportunities depending on what comes up. So you could have a financials opportunity or you could have a consumption opportunity. So all that is there. And I think the most interesting tadka that is going to come out is this whole specialized investment fund space, which is this category SEBI has created. Historically, we had mutual funds for the Amad Janta. And then we had PMS and AIF, everybody's heard, for the HNI. Now you have something in the middle.
Okay.
Which has, and funds haven't been launched, but licenses have been granted, which gives you some of the flexibility of the HNI platforms, but the 10 lakh access of the mutual fund platforms. So, SEBI's actually introduced this category of...
What will it be called?
Specialized investment funds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you have this tadka category now that's coming out. So you have lots of accessories, but this is all accessories. 20% accessories.
20% accessories. 80% you should be doing sober
stuff.
Do you recommend like the plain old SIP or that for that 80% sober stuff, track the markets, top it up on a intraday, like, let's assume Russia, Ukraine ho raha hai ki, or, US and Iran are at loggerheads. The market will like cut a little bit that morning in reaction. Should I be sitting at my terminal and topping up my mutual funds or just do the SIP and leave it?
So I think the vanilla strategy is max out your SIPs because that way, even if Russia, Ukraine is happening and there's a big dip, at the end of the month, you have taken action because your SIP has kicked in. If you don't have the time to do something, your SIP has. Now, if you are active on top of that and you have the time, you can top it up a little bit.
You can top it up a little bit.
You can, instead of, your bank account will have that money, right?
Yes.
So, you can top it up that little bit. But the SIP, I think, makes sure that you don't have to because we're often busy.
How much interest do you have right now in the unlisted startup sector in terms, as an investor? Is it more interesting than the listed space?
So I don't do listed equities. I only do mutual funds or unlisted.
Professionally or because of a conflict?
Because of conflict and compliance, and I don't have time. I mean, all things, but mostly it's compliance. Post Shark Tank, my portfolio is about 10% unlisted. Unlisted is getting so much attention by everybody for good and bad reasons both. I mean, I think it's the new opportunity and it's also the new minefield. I started unlisted because of Shark Tank and it's just been such a joy to look at these entrepreneurs and watch these companies, and then I've added on to those unlisted investments. I would also say it's not for everyone because I don't know when I'm going to get an exit, right?
Yeah.
You know, I may be up 2x on paper or 5x on paper on some of these companies. I am, but I may not earn anything from some of them, and I may get my cash exit in 5 years. There's also this, and I had tweeted about this crazy bubble going on in the unlisted market where pre-IPO, there's sort of a grey market for unlisted companies, and ESOPs or some stock in the markets being exchanged, and people assume things in the unlisted market are never going to go down. So there was one IPO that happened where the unlisted market was trading at I think 1250 or 1300. Very good company, very, very good company. No fault of the companies. I mean, if people are buying at random prices, God help them. And the IPOs happened at 700. So suddenly people are down 40-50%. So, warning, just because it's unlisted doesn't mean it's going to go up. The financial gravity still works. So, I do unlisted as my long-term India development partner with interesting entrepreneurs, often where I can add value fund.
Actually, speaking of India development, India has, I think, marquee, if we look at our country in the last, say, 12 odd years since this government has been in power, large-scale infrastructure building. For me, that's the theme, right? Yeah. It's visible. You can see it. It's in all your cities, everywhere. Is that still a theme in investment you think is going to continue to play out? Yeah. Because we know that the government will continue to spend in order to keep the economy going as well. Do you expect us to continue to build large infrastructure? Is there an investment idea there that has not been fully explored and played out yet?
So, the first question is, I expect infrastructure build out to continue happening. I think CapEx spend, the rate of growth may vary, but CapEx spend is reality. So I don't think that's going away. In terms of and our city is needed. I mean, quite frankly, you look at the city we're living in, we don't do infrastructure. I don't know what is going to happen. I was speaking at IATA, the International Airport Transport Conference, and someone from the government was only telling me that they took, I think we built 70 airports or something in the first 70 years of independence. In the next decade, we built 70 and we need to build another 100 more. And by all means, we're not building ghost airports. Where we're building airports like Ayodhya, you are seeing real economic benefits. So I think infrastructure is a reality. Historically, we've had infra funds, okay? I think, and that has focused very much on physical infrastructure. I think there will be an opportunity, and we've talked about this at Edelweiss, of a new age within the mutual fund ambit of infrastructure 2.0. Data centers, smart cities, because infrastructure is not just building a road and highway. Of course, you've got the whole REIT and InvIT space also, which has become
your real estate funds,
real estate trusts, your infra trusts, all of that. But I actually think, and that's on the fixed income or hybrid side, I actually think there'll be an infra 2.0 idea when we have enough listed companies in that space.
For secondary real estate, which you said you do not like to do, but if there is someone who does, secondary real estate physical or REITs or, a fund that invests in real estate?
So the good thing is with REITs, they're well regulated. They're not as liquid as equities, but if you're a buy and hold investor, and you can pick the right REIT, I think you get the good benefit of capital appreciation and flow. So if you were to ask me, I would say REITs, but just watch the liquidity.
I was reading the chart of a SEBI that was interestingly started after the Harshad Mehta scam squished a lot of small investors who lost a lot of money. It's meant to look out for and protect the average investor.
Yes.
In our market right now, there are big players. Would you say are regulators doing enough to protect the small guy?
I would say for the large part, yes. And it's a fine balance our regulator needs to strike. And I think they are also learning and evolving. You don't want to go back to the days of Competition Commission of India. Now, small investors are ideally meant to enter the market either through listed equities or managed vehicles like mutual funds. I genuinely think, having seen both global and India, that our mutual fund industry is one of the best regulated in the world. There are some rules that we have here that exist nowhere in the world for investor protection, including the 20% deduction that happens on my salary every month. I mean, these are incredible rules. The kind of disclosure that we have, it's incredible. I was in Japan on a fundraising trip and I was walking through some of this, and that's one of the most developed markets out there. And they were blown away. And this is typically the reaction I get. On the other hand, you do have retail investors who are losing money in F&O. You have people sitting on the SME stock exchange.
Yes.
You have people buying, even worse, unregulated chit funds.
Yes.
Now there, you have to find some balance. You have to create awareness that do only regulated stuff. You can't stop people from buying F&O, but you can do a certain set of things around it. You can't stop people from buying SME IPO, although there's some conversation that maybe retail shouldn't do that. So I think there's a fine balance between, SIF, which I talked about, is perhaps another way to tell the retail person, आपको थोड़ा सा तड़का चाहिए ना mutual funds में, तो यहाँ से कर लो. It's managed by someone. At least when it's managed by someone, you don't lose your entire shirt.
Yes.
Right? A button might fall off. So I think it is a fine balance. And there's also trial and error.
How much in percentage, and I'll give you like a easy way to wiggle out of this question. How much manipulation do you think might happen in our market by larger players?
Hard to answer, and I don't know how to wiggle out of this. You've given me an answer. I think for the large part, if you look at the listed universe of equities, while there can be accidents, and we've all seen accidents in equities, and I think equities may put an accident as a part of equity investing. I think for the large part, our markets have delivered on the promise of investor protection. Now, there'll be one case, one company, there's something, then SEBI will do an investigation. I can tell you disclosures have gotten a lot better. Like if you look at smaller companies, mid-cap companies, 15 years ago, everybody doing a management con call, all of this was thoda sa not common. Now, everybody's just doing it. I'll tell you an anecdotal story. I have many friends who are second gen, third gen promoters. And, there was a mindset, perhaps in one generation, that thoda paisa company se nikal diya, chal jaye. Now people, I think, realize a market cap game is too big. If I have a questionable corporate governance reputation, I will struggle to raise money in an IPO. I will struggle to raise money in a QIP. And that 100 crores I'm taking out from the side, now I will give up 1,000 crores in market cap on multiple. That realization, I think, is starting to come in. I see this in second and third gen people that we want to
be able to
check the boxes on governance. So that governance is a word because of SEBI, because of the fact that you have smart domestic capital. See, India has gone from a market that was dominated by global capital to one where domestic capital, and I think domestic capital is smart. They're on ground. They know what's happening. But you can't fool large institutions like mutual funds anymore. It's harder. It's becoming harder and harder.
Do you remember the GameStop incident in the US?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It was a fairish long time ago. But basically, over a Reddit group, they inflated what would be, I think, a penny stock. And then exited. And we were doing it regularly. Given now that we have AI as well that will generate tips and things like that, are we prepared for that sort of what they call pumping and dumping of stocks and things like that? Or is it
in a small way? You already see it again without taking names, right? There'll be a small cap company or micro, and I don't think it's going to go away. A small micro cap company or small cap company that has very low free float. So it's very easy to move the price. And a bunch of investors are going to get together on Instagram or Reddit, wo sab hamare yahan bhi hota hai, and inflate the price and then, exit it. We already see some of that happening, right? So I don't think that's going to...
That's not a big thing.
And I don't know what you can do to protect against it. Yeah.
So actually, when I asked around my team, if anybody has the question, our editor asked about crypto. It was like, what's going on with crypto? I know. The one boy on our team.
Yeah. The questions, like 2 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, a lot of people were asking crypto questions. I only have 2 points, and I have gotten trolled a lot for talking about crypto. One is crypto is not regulated in India. Okay. And please prove me otherwise, but no one's been able to. Crypto is not regulated. And I generally have a strong preference for things that are regulated because there is a grievance mechanism. Second is, most people don't know why crypto goes up. Most people who are buying crypto don't understand crypto. I don't like investing that you don't understand. That too into something unregulated. Thoda minefield hai.
I mean, I think that if when something is unregulated and there's no accountability, it could your money could go poof tomorrow. You should be okay with that possibility.
I told an uncle at a golf club in Diwali when he said, I'm going to take half my savings and put it into crypto. So I said, Uncle, there's a pond right opposite us. Aap pani mein dal ke chahiye. Crypto mein mat daliye. I don't think he listened, but anyway.
I'd be curious to know how that uncle is doing right now.
Yeah.
I remember reading a joke, I think it was on Instagram somewhere, that where one person said, how much money should I put in the stock market today if I want 1 crore rupees next month? So he said, put 2 crore rupees.
That's nice. That's nice. That's nice.
So when someone asks you, ki kahan paise dale, what's your answer?
Mutual funds are here.
On brand. You have a book coming out.
I do.
Tell us about the book.
The book is to do exactly what we did, to make sure people who are scared of money are not scared of it by the end of it. It's genuinely a financial literacy effort because it drives me. For years, I keep hearing money is complicated, money is complicated, money is complicated. And I've been asking myself, okay, I've been working for 20 years. What can I do about it? And we do content and we do podcasts and we do articles. But there's not a recipe book in one place. So the book is written as a recipe book. It walks you through first the foundations of money. Ki risk kya hota hai, return kya hota hai, how much return should you expect from your investments? Am I ready to take a home loan? If so, how much amount? If I have credit card debt, when it is a problem or not, how do I build a habit of saving? So these are foundations. Then it walks you through what I call the building blocks: equity, debt, gold. Kaise chalte hain, kyun chalte hain? And third, it talks about, okay, I have a life. How do I put all this together to make money work? How do I build a better retirement? How do I use mutual funds? How do I do something for my child? And it's written for Indians in an Indian context with Indian bhasha. And I hope very dal chawal bhasha. I hope it's written in simple bhasha. And the challenge with these things is, I mean, as I said, it's one of the hardest things I've done because to simplify stuff is really hard. So we've constantly gone back and said, oh, that's jargon. Like, nobody understands what asset allocation is. Like, where's that word? So how do we, instead of saying asset allocation, say, make your own thali? Really make it basic. And the second is, how do we make finance fun? So we have whiskey analogies and we have car analogies and we have food analogies so that someone will actually read it. So that's our hope, and we hope to do multiple languages also.
I wish you very, very good luck, Radhika. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.